What is the ultimate goal of the project? Like, what do you have to turn in? I know that they don't have an expectation for your project to stay static, but what do they expect?
You mean what, at the end of it? You can speak to that.
You have to file quarterly reports as you travel, which can be brief and informal. And at the end of the year, they expect a 5-page report of what you did. So they're not looking for a big end product. They also have a conference for returning Watson Fellows. So after you've spent your year traveling, you get to go and meet everyone else who was traveling as a Watson Fellow that year, and talk about your projects. People give mini presentations on what they did, what they learned, show photographs, share stories. It's a wonderful experience, and I'm still in touch with some of the people I met on that project, at that conference rather. I mean, I had a tremendous amount of material that I gathered in my year as a Watson, and I had no idea what to do with it. As I said, some of the field work that I did in India was the basis of my first published scholarly essay. I had the field work, but I had no idea how to take it and make it into something that someone else could read that would be legible to an academic discipline. That took graduate school. You know, I had to, and this was after several years of doing other things, working as the manager of a dance company, directing, acting, etc. I finally submitted to inevitability and applied to go get a PhD in theater, which is what I always knew I was going to do anyway, but spent years trying to resist. And then once I was in graduate school and had a mentor who was an expert in Indian theater, I was able to dust off those notes, do the complementary historical research, learn what the discourse was about this particular theater form, make it into an essay. That is not what the Watson Foundation is looking for. I actually emailed them the essay when it was published because I was so proud. I was like, I did this work as a Watson Fellow, 5 or 6 years ago, and now finally, it's in the drama review, it's been peer reviewed and everything. I never even got a response. I mean, I think that they just don't care that much about what you do with what you learn. But if you look at former Watson Fellows and where they've gone, it's an incredibly diverse and impressive group of people. And there are a lot of academics, but there are also a lot of business leaders, people in politics, activists, artists. It's not like looking at a roster of Marshall, Mitchell, etc., where you see people, almost invariably with distinguished academic careers. The possibilities after the Watson Fellowship are much broader. So that's a long answer to your question, but I hope that gets at what you were asking.
How do you give money? Do you have to send them all the receipts, or just give you the money and just take it?
The money, I mean, Steve may be able to better answer this than I am, but the money is administered through Colgate. And what I recall from my experience at Haverford was that Haverford wrote me this big check, and it was like after all the tuition that I had paid, I got this pass-through money from the Watson that, then Haverford passed on to me. And then I put it in my bank account and hoped that it didn't run out before I got the second check 6 months into the year. So obviously I planned, right? I mean, the fellowship is sufficient for most kinds of projects, but it's not a lot of money. You have, especially if you're traveling in the developed world for part of the year, you have to budget and you have to plan carefully. And then at the end of the year, they do expect to see a breakdown of how you spent your money, but you don't need to keep every receipt from 365 days of travel, because that would be onerous.
Let me just add to that as part of the proposal that comes into the committee here, we ask you to submit a budget.
Yeah,
right?
and that goes to the Watson Foundation.
And it goes to the
yeah.
foundation too, although they don't require. It's interesting. I think our committee has gotten more focused on the budget over the last few years as we've tried to zero in on who's kind of really done their background research.
Yeah.
You know, it's a way for us to start to discriminate among often very good projects and proposals. And so one of the things that that the budget demonstrates to us is that you've actually done the research. You've actually looked at what the cost of living in a particular country is, and that the numbers add up in terms of the days you're planning to spend there, the costs of incidentals. I mean, things like, you know, what are you going to have to pay for internet? What are you going to have to pay for translators? You know, I often have students who say, oh, I don't speak any of these languages. I will hire translators. Well, the $25,000 does not go all that far if you're going to need hours and hours of translation in 6 different countries. It's just not going to stretch. And professional translators, you know, they deserve to get paid. And if you're taking somebody off the street and handing them a few bucks to translate, how well can you rely on them, you know? So the budget has become more important, I think, to the committee over the years as we try to figure out who's really, you know, who's really crafted something that meets those criteria of feasibility that the foundation really looks to, and commitment, which the foundation is looking for. So
I feel like I'm not sure like how the Watson program would deal with this question of like translators, because I feel like I could study Arabic for like the next 10 years intensively and not get the same nuance that I would have with a translator.
right.
Yeah.
Like there's no way I will fluent.
Because you dealt with
Well,
the
you can make, in addition to, as Professor Moran suggested, making a case about how you will develop the language skills that you need in advance of your travel or over the course of your travel. You can also make a case about the relative importance of language to your project. And the way that I did that as someone who is a native English speaker, had studied Spanish for a long time, but was not planning to travel anywhere Spanish was spoken on my Watson year. I situated my interest in performance space as an interest that included but also went beyond language. Right? Obviously, language is a huge part of culture, and it's a huge part of theater in almost every culture. But theater also registers on other semiotic levels, right? There's the actor's body, there's the style of movement, costumes, etc. And I knew I was going to be looking at traditional theater forms that draw improvisationally on well-known epic narratives. For instance, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata in India. So the argument I made was, I'm going to read these epics in English translation. I'm going to familiarize myself with the theatrical conventions that I'll be seeing on stage. And I'm going to try to make friends with bilingual people in the audience who will translate for me. And believe it or not, it actually worked. I mean, I attended a lot of performances in both India and Japan where I found someone who, without being paid, was willing to help me understand the nuances of the performance that I might not have been able to grasp because of my obstacles with language. And I think I would have had a richer experience in my fellowship here if I had more language skills that were specific to the places I was traveling. But I still got a tremendous amount out of it. And I learned some things as I went along. I mean, I can't claim competence in any of the various languages that I studied over the course of the year now. But as I was traveling, you know, I tried to pick up as much as I could. And the fact that I had experience studying one other language in depth and had spent a summer living in Peru when I was in high school, etc., that helped, made it easier for me to pick up new things.
How specific does your project have to be? If specificity, does it help you in terms of the Watson? Because like looking at Streetcars, he's talking about government in general. And looking at Rebecca, she's talking about Rome. So could you speak to that in terms of thinking of a project? Is it the specificity that you help you?
Both that you have envisioned in specific terms what you will be doing day to day, and that you're willing to be flexible if that plan doesn't work out. But if you go into a situation like the ones Professor Moran was just describing without any kind of plan at all, it's hard to develop one once you're there, right? So it's easier to take an existing plan and scrap it or change it or improvise on it than it is to start from scratch when you're already on the road. And you're not going to get the opportunity if you can't answer that question. I mean, I would say that's a question, I think we asked it of everybody this year. What will you be doing day to day? So no matter how broad your project is conceptually, if you can answer that question, both in your proposal and in an interview, I'd say you have something that has a shot, you know? So and that can include projects that are meticulously specific and projects that are broader in how they're framed.
We do, I mean, in addition to the budget, we do in the committee like to see the list of contacts. We like to see that you have made some sort of connection to somebody in each of the places, that you have already exchanged information with. You've told this person or people that you are, what the broad topic of the proposal is, and if you get it, you'll be arriving, and can they help you? And we like to see that you've got some people lined up. And as you can imagine, because I started doing this back in the 80s, you know, I mean, that used to be this incredibly onerous, difficult project. People were writing letters and making phone calls in the middle of the night and not getting anything back. Now you've got email. There is no excuse. Okay, you can Facebook people in another country. I mean, that, you know, we used to, it was impossible to line up in some places.
Yeah, and I think that the standards have changed as a result, because you know, in the olden days, back in the 20th century, if you had a contact in each of the countries that you were planning to visit, or a contact in most of the countries, that was sufficient. That was sufficient for me when I was applying in 2000, 2001. Now it's so much easier to find people, right? So we look for more than just one contact. We look to see that you've begun to network to the extent that that's possible through electronic communication in the places that you plan to visit. And I think it makes a huge difference in terms of what you can do once you get there. Because I've heard stories from people who did Watson Fellowships in the 70s and 80s who showed up somewhere really knowing no one, with an idea of what they wanted to do, but no idea of where to start in terms of who to ask, who to call, where to go, right? And so the internet is a powerful resource in terms of preparing for this fellowship and also in terms of carrying it out.
Are there other questions? Well, thank you very much for attending. Let's give